Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund Grants Committee meeting. And we're going to start today, as we always do, with an opening inspiration. And James is going to facilitate that. So I'm going to stop my screen share and allow him to start.
Thank you all for being here. And yeah, as tonight's inspiration, want to reflect and share that on July 17th, just about a week and a half ago, we lost a legend. John Lewis passed away, somebody who dedicated his life to justice and to civil rights, served for over 33 years in Congress representing the 5th District in Georgia, and was both an icon and a leader and an inspiration for all of us. And so wanted to share a speech or excerpts from a speech that he made on the 50th anniversary of the March at Selma, often known as Bloody Sunday, when peaceful protesters and civil rights activists were embarking on a 50-mile march that was stopped by police brutality at a bridge that became a turning point and also a pressure point for the civil rights movement. And so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this video plays as intended. I'll give it a moment to where it pops up.
We can see it.
Can you hear it?
No.
Oh. I apologize then. And I think I may need to change a setting in Zoom for that to work if you can't hear it. So instead we'll have a moment of silence and I will then look to play this back during the break that we have so that we can still have it. So I apologize for that.
That's great.
But let's hold just about 30 seconds of silence. All right. Thank you all. And I also wanted to note, just as a quick update and reminder for folks, that we have the application support grants open right now, and those will be closing on Friday, basically midnight at the end of Friday. So for those of the public who are with organizations that are nonprofit organizations, especially those that are small and serve marginalized and disadvantaged people, particularly Black and Indigenous people, we encourage you to apply and have resources of up to $5,000 per organization to help you get ready and engage in capacity building to prepare for PCEF grants. So I'll try to figure out the video between now and our break that we have. But yeah, I'll turn it back over to Katie.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
And I need to stop sharing, so we'll do that.
Okay, so is the title slides back up? Yep, okay, great. So welcome again. I'm just gonna go over the public guidance, public participation guidance real quick. The committee meetings are open to the public, of course, and the public is invited to provide comment at around 6:10 p.m. Or whenever we are able to get to it in the order of things. The chat box is open right now for everyone to use, and we ask that you to use that to put your name, organizational affiliation if you have one, and your pronouns if you want to share those, so that we can introduce you after we go through committee and staff introductions. The chat box is also where you can indicate if you're interested in providing public comment. Just put a note in there so that we can get you up in the queue. Outside of the public comment time, members of the public will have their microphones muted, and we ask that the video be used only for committee members and staff. Also, just wanted to note that this meeting is being recorded and that closed captioning is available, and you can find that by going up to the menu bar on your Zoom there, and then the three little dots that say more, there's a drop-down menu, and you can go to view full transcript, and that's where you can see the live transcription of the meeting. So with that, I think we will start with introductions. And before we go there, James, is anyone just on the phone?
I do not see anybody on the phone, no.
Okay, great. So we'll start with committee members, and let's start with Randfeast.
Hi, everyone. Randfeast, Genetino Viatoro, committee member, he, him pronouns.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Moreland, committee member, he, him.
Megan?
Megan Horst, committee member, she, her.
Maria?
Maria Sippin, she, they, committee member.
Robin?
Good evening, Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
Andrea?
Hi, folks. Andrea Hamburg, she, her, committee member.
Faith?
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you. Faith Graham, she, her, committee member.
Michael?
Michael Eden Hill, he, him, committee member.
And Shanice?
Shanice Clark, she, the committee member.
All right, and now we'll move to staff, and we'll start with James.
Everybody, good evening. James Valdez, PCEF staff, he, him pronouns.
Janet?
Good evening, Janet Hammer, she, her, PCEF staff.
And Wendy?
Hi there, Wendy Kelfkin, she, her, staff.
And I'm Katie Lister, PCEF staff, she, her pronouns. And now Sam.
Hi, folks. Sam Barrasso, he, him, PCEF staff. And I'll go ahead and read off the folks in the chat box. So we've got with us here tonight, and welcome. And I apologize if I've mispronounced anyone's name. But Angela Carly Cook, she, her, Oregon Solar Energy Industries Association. Jenny Hall, she, her, Energy Trust of Oregon. Angela Pravidelli, she, her, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff. Jay Ward, he, him, his, Energy Trust of Oregon. Anissa Pemberton, Coalition of Communities of Color, and the PCEF Community Coalition. Joshua Baker, he, his, Lloyd Eco District. Zach Snyder, he, him, Solar Oregon. And Anissa Pemberton, they, them. Okay, if anyone else joins, or and I think there's a few earlier ones I may have missed. I'm making sure. Okay, if I missed you, hopefully I'll get you. Okay, and Deidre Schutz, Nutrition Garden RX, she, her. Right.
And it doesn't look like anyone signed up for public comment, so I think that we will just move right in to the agenda. And so the first thing that we're going to be talking about today are large grants. And Sam is going to kind of cover some of the questions we had around the workforce and contractor benefits section.
Okay. So last committee meeting last week, when we dug into the workforce and contractor equity section, there's one particular place where, and just for folks to recall, this is where this took place for projects where you had at least $500,000 invested into a singular site, $500,000 of soft and hard construction costs invested into a singular site, that you would be answering a certain set of more detailed questions, and you'd be answering questions around your contractor, because there'd be an expectation you'd come in with a contractor, as well as your workforce utilization goals, commitments, but generally your expectations on the workforce that you'd employ on the project. And so there was a discussion around sort of what level of resolution do we ask, and how do we ask these questions around the workforce in order to better tease out and better ascertain at a proposal level what folks intend to do. As we didn't have necessarily, I think in that discussion we talked about several different ways, and staff following that we said we'd email you all a handful of options in order to consider ways in which we could ask the questions. And this is really focused on just how we ask the questions, not necessarily the scoring, but how we ask the questions to applicants. And so as just a memory refresh, the way that we sent this to the PCEF committee members, option A was really a question that was focused on a narrative. It was how, what are, and I should have had pulled up the document, but let's just leave it at that. It was a narrative focused on how you plan to have inclusive workforce on your job site in particular. And there's a particular question, and this was asked across all of the options. What specific strategies would you use to bring on or recruit Black and Indigenous workers? Option B had that narrative, but there was at least a little bit more direction and form to it, where there was a specific table that, thank you. There is a specific table here in option B that is referenced, and it's on the following page, but the gist is option B had a narrative as well as a table. Then option C, and in the table, the questions were really focused at a high level on the numbers around your workforce, your POC, what was your commitments, expectations around people of color workers on your project, women, people of color, or women of color, women, non-women, white women, as well as folks with disabilities and other potential priority populations. And then option C was was also a narrative, but a more detailed, disaggregated table focusing on, in addition to those categories, breaking down people of color into Black folks on your project as well as Indigenous people on your project. And this was asked for both journey level for non-apprentice workers as well as apprentice workers. And so if we scroll back to the slide here, if we can, I want to talk to you. And so what we heard back from committee members was generally there was a couple of committee members that were in favor of option 2. It was roughly 4 committee members that were in favor of option B, and it really was 3 committee members that said option B makes the most sense, and then 1 committee member which would describe it was a modified version of option B, but an acknowledgement that option C probably wasn't it. We had one of the committee members who preferred option A, preferred both option A, but if option A wasn't the desired, would prefer option C. So sort of, you can tease that out. So you could see someone popping with option C, and then one individual preferring option C, and one of the committee members deferring to staff and community input. So I think as we walk away from this, our suggestion on this is just, I think what we took away from this, there's a lot of feedback we got just around the wording and I think this will come back as we think about what we're asking of you tonight, and what we're going to be coming back to is we will be going through largely the format that was presented in option B, but we're going to just spend some time with folks to make sure that we can word this in a way, frankly, that isn't, I think some of the suggestions we got did make it seem just breaking out the question a little bit more, made it more approachable. And so what we're going to be working on is really the visual design of how folks approach that question and making sure it just seems more approachable. And so that's going to be a theme that's going to carry across all of the changes that we're going to be, not changes, but after we sort of move forward today, assuming we can get to at least some level of approval on the content and the large grant application and scoring criteria. A lot of our work is going to be focused on really making sure that the documents are as easy to navigate and accessible as possible, recognizing that they're still not insubstantial documents, but that there's a lot of work that we can do in order to make sure they're just visually more accessible. So that's just what that's what came out, and I want to just make sure there's an opportunity for folks to reflect on that, or if folks had any other additional questions around the feedback we did hear from individual committee members. Okay. Hearing none. Let's go to, Michael.
I was just going to say, I think I was the one that said A, but if not C. But actually, I would be okay with B. I would just fine with B. So, if that helps.
I think what we're going to see is, I mean, I feel like a broken, there's a piece of this that as folks walk through this, we're just going to, we will, and mind you, I mean, I think what we hope to come back out of this process is just what were folks' experience with this in question marks. What were the hard pieces of it? So we will check in with folks as they go through this application process to see what it meant for them and just how this did go for them. But I mean, the expectation is that we sort of ask these questions this year, and I hope that this isn't the end of this conversation as we come back to this, particularly as we go to larger grants, that we broach this again next year, the following year, and getting to a point where we can be pushing on these elements. But I think this will give us a good starting place to see just what it means for folks to answer these questions.
MDC Megan has her hand up.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So it sounds like maybe we're sort of coalescing or maybe not, but you know, it was hard to answer because I just kept thinking about the feedback we were getting from folks like, I think their name was Ramos, J.R. Ramos, if I'm remembering, a community member, and just the conversations we've had that we can include tables, but people just might not be able to fill them out accurately in forecast. And so my only concern, like I said B, but my concern was like, it feels like people might forecast incorrectly about their ability to do that. And so I don't know what we do with that when we're reviewing. We won't know, and people might just make up numbers. So I don't know how we're going to deal with that. And that was just kind of one question I have about all of this. I do like asking for people to be specific and have goals. But if we're not actually, you know, if they're just lofty goals that they're throwing out there, I don't know what we're getting from that. So I don't know. That's my concern, I guess.
Yeah, and this was some feedback other committee members raised as well in terms of just the resolution of feedback that we're asking for. And I think, I mean, we will certainly check back in with, I mean, I think we're going to be checking with several folks as we just get to sort of the final version and say, what does it mean to answer this question? Are we phrasing this right? Because there was, I mean, I think there's going back and forth between goals, commitments, and the different messages each of them send. And the intent was that we wanted to send a clear message that these are, you know, these are things we want people to be accountable to. And so I expect that we will absolutely have no shortage of questions during the Q&A around sort of how folks are expected to go through that. And we'll be just chatting with the team around how we share guidance to folks around that, so that at least we're consistent with the guidance. And I mean, there was feedback that we should keep these in larger buckets of, you know, 10%, maybe 10%, 20%, 30%, like indicating that in order to kind of de-emphasize the fact that we expect a high level of resolution. But as we chatted, 10 to 20% means a huge difference, or it can mean a huge difference. Some of those block numbers can mean a huge difference with some of these goals. I mean, particularly with women in the workforce. I mean, it's you know, we're talking about oftentimes that, you know, goals that are in the realm of at least on other city contracts, goals that are sometimes in the realm of 9%, 15%. And so we will have conversations around just what that approachability, what that means, and go through that with both the team as well as just external folks that are new to this, that have engaged on these type of projects. Okay, Ramsey, so I did see your hand go up and then down. So
I think I was just going to wait to hear if any other folks had comments on this section, but I'd step back for a minute. I guess unless there are other folks with comments, you know, I think looking forward to, I think with suggestions staff has, you know, compiled, I think this is an area that it's worth listening to the feedback from community. I think some of the points that I raised from me was, you know, one, recognizing a warning message here. Was just essentially, you know, that I think the way that we have drafted the questions and listed our drafts were inconsistent with our BIPOC stated values. But I think we've made that effort in some of the previous questions and earlier sections on the application. But I recognize, I think the feedback from folks around. Can folks hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think it's just the feedback of, I understand the feedback from contractors where this section can feel nebulous, but I do want to remind folks that contractors play an important role in the recruitment, the hiring, the training of this key workforce. Many contractors sit on joint apprenticeship training programs. So, I think forward facing, in the future, as we think about this question, I think I just want to remind committee members that contractors do play a role in the process for how we diversify the industry. And I think projecting goals is just as important as how we project our greenhouse gas reduction goals and other environmental benefits that we're trying to achieve through PCEF. And I think without goals and without a North Star, there is no roadmap for us to fully explore strategies to achieve the kinds of outcomes that we want in PCEF. And I think at this point, without these questions, completely removed with these questions, I think we are really just left with no utilization goals for contractors to work towards. And I think we're really just reading strategies and goals, strategies of diversifying, but no real clarity around what is each contractor, each nonprofit's goals. But I welcome, I think, just hearing what staff's come up with, and I think just want to be as a committee member, just being responsive and listening to the comments that I think committee members are providing.
Sam, your mic is muted.
I guess I hope that we've been able to strike a balance with the over 500,000 single site projects. I think that question with regards to sort of the under 500,000, it's a big place where we're expecting more to be getting our results out of managing these projects and the grant agreements, and sort of the expectations we draw out in their agreements around how we expect them, based on their sort of individual situations, but how they are doing their recruitment and what our expectations around what are their recruitment strategies and various other strategies to assure that they've got both a diverse pool of contractors, but also that those contractors have elements in their contracts to assure that they're going to have a diverse workforce. It's going to be we'll be connecting with certainly our city partners and others that play in the similar role, that do this work with their contracted entities in order to tease out sort of how they enforce and implement those sorts of measures. But it's certainly an area that I could acknowledge we'll be learning quite a bit as a team around how we do that better, and hoping to bring that back to you all as we go through the contracting efforts in early 2021. Okay. I'm going to go ahead, and this isn't the next slide has it isn't so much, but I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next slide here. So I think we sent you all, it was on Friday, but we sent you all sort of finding what we pulled together, which was the summation of the past few weeks of discussions pulled together this past Friday around the large grant scoring criteria and application questions. And so what we're hoping for here today is committee approval of the content of the draft language that will be in the large grant application and the scoring criteria. We recognize that the words aren't all perfectly right, the structure, the style, all of that's coming together, and we did just an initial preview with our communications team of the website and the landing page and that structure. So a lot of it is we'll be working through in the next month around how do we bring it all together? How do we actually bring it all together in a way that has people interacting with it? Because what you all saw was the entirety of the application and every question that someone may view. When in recognition, if someone goes through an online application, they won't see all of those questions, which just create a different set of confusion oftentimes when you see all the questions laid out. So there is just going to be a good chunk of editing and visual design to work on the application for accessibility and ease of use, including accessibility of language. So that all is going to happen, but we want to make sure that at least the core of the content is what we're looking for approval so we can move forward. And our expectation then is we'll be working on this where we will be bringing back the final RFP with all of that together for approval to you all. But that at least at that point, it's really it's not really a discussion of the content. It's really that you feel that all of it pulled together is the right content. And so I think that's what we're hoping for here today. And then the expectation is we'd move on to the discussion around the small grants and planning grants. And then assuming all that goes, if all that goes on track, that potentially we'd be bringing those grants to you all for approval next week. So this is where sort of this is sort of where we ask for the remaining of your thoughts coming through, so that we can ideally get to a proposal to approve the content here.
Sam, I have a question about the planning grants timeline. I know that the activities here are stated that they should be completed within 1 year of receiving an award. This is not initiated with 1 year of receiving the award. This is everything has to be done unless otherwise stated in the application.
Yeah, and we will, and I don't want to we will go through that as well, but that is a key criteria that you've seen that, yes, that would be the expectation. And it's more to set, it's more an expectation, but we know, and we have language there that folks can request more time if they need more time. But 1 second, I think I can. Sorry, I'm just, I'm gonna see if I can, I think Katie, you're trying to join by phone, right?
I am back on. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Do I sound clearer now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, but the expectation will be a year. And we will, but I also want to say, let's not get too far into the planning grants if possible, because we will move to that. Next up will be the small grants, so that as large grants are fresh in your mind, we'll talk about just the difference between the small and large grants, and then we'll talk about the planning grant. So we'll go through the planning grant application in detail. We just sent that to you all, but it was more so you all had it in front of you all as you all are going through this discussion.
Sorry,
not
I got the headings mixed up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think before we move on, we really want to make sure we air out any remaining thoughts, concerns, hopes with the content in the large grant application and the scoring criteria.
Okay.
Sam, it went real silent when you asked for any comments, and I think I had lost track of the fact that we weren't going to walk through that large grant agreement. So where we are now is you're looking for anything left on the large grant, right? Okay, cool. One question I have, and I feel like I should remember the answer to this. There were a couple of questions that made me think, are there a threshold number of points, or are there certain questions that have to be answered in a way that's satisfactory for the large grant to, make its way to the top? And let me just offer a particular question. There's one in the project description that says the services and activities, I'm in the scoring criteria. The services and activities described in the scope will realistically result in intended outcomes. And that's got 5 points, which is, proportionately quite large. But I'm thinking, what if you could put together an application that looks brilliant on every other criteria, but the scoring panel says, yeah, but it'll never achieve those results. It feels like you could score really high and be in the top 10% and therefore get an award, and yet there's no confidence, right, of the scoring panel that you could achieve what you set out to achieve. So it feels like there's likely some thresholds, and I know we talked about that early on, and I just can't remember where we are with respect to some of those questions, to that Yeah, Katie, thank you.
So we did talk about that a fair amount, and we didn't set any thresholds as within the scoring criteria that the scoring panel is going to deal with. So it's possible there could be a scenario like that, but I would note that there is this technical feasibility step that happens right after the eligibility screening. And so if a project, and while it's a fairly low threshold, it really should eliminate all of the applications that have where they just are not feasible. Like for whatever reason, they're not going to work. Those ones would never get to the scoring panel. So there's a little bit of a threshold there in the technical review. And I guess the only other thing that I would note is that if the project description and scope is truly unworkable, it's highly likely that that application would also score poorly on HG reductions, benefits to community members, like kind of on other criteria in other sections as well. Does that make sense?
No, that's super helpful. I appreciate that. Dealing with a scenario that I was thinking about as I was reading this again this afternoon about a project just not being technically feasible. Thank you for a reminder of the technical review. You raised one other thing, and for me, if I can go ahead, I don't know if there's a long list of folks already who have questions. Oh, yes, there is. So I'll wait.
Yeah.
I'll wait.
Okay. Well, I'll put you back down. Jeffrey?
Yeah, last week I remember us talking about there was a criteria. It was apprentice utilization rate, and I think we were talking about potentially getting rid of that if we were having a debate about it not being necessarily something to worry about, and maybe redistributing those points. Was that ever resolved? I don't remember. I think it was like right at the end of the last meeting. I'm not sure if it was actually resolved or not, so I just wanted to kind of check in on that.
This was, make sure I'm not muted. Okay, we did not, so we reached out to a couple of stakeholders, did not hear back. We did leave it in, and we just clarified the question itself. So there's a little bit more clarity that we brought to this question on apprenticeship utilization, and but we did leave it in. So it is there. We just clarified, it's no longer based on sort of this ratio. So instead we're focused, we backed away from the language of ratio since that was a little technical and getting into the weeds, but it was what is your expectation on the percentage of work hours that are going to go to apprentices? And so there are 2 points there. And I think, well, I'll stop with that.
Does that satisfy your question, Jeffrey?
Yeah, it answers my question. Is that something? I guess my question is that something that we want to still explore, or is everybody feel comfortable with just leaving the 2 points in there for the rest of the committee? Because it sounded like when Ramfis and Michael were kind of talking about it, they were saying they thought it was completely unnecessary for that section. So I was just kind of curious if we want to just keep that in there, or we want to just talk about potentially redistributing those points somewhere else. Just putting that out there. So I'm open to that conversation if we have time to do that.
So what I will just share is I think our reflections on that were, I think we heard loud and clear, from Ramfis and Michael that those are that criteria. Folks always hit their max. And from Jeffrey, I know when we heard from you that it seemed like it wasn't necessarily that you all intentionally try to hit the max, but that you might not otherwise. And so, and when we reflected back on sort of the push for having the push for inclusion of that criteria originally did come from a workforce advocate that had done a lot of work within the apprenticeship space. And so we reached back out, and holidays and whatnot couldn't get connected, or not holidays, but they couldn't get connected with that individual just given the time frame. And so we left it in with the expectation that we imagine that there probably, given what we just heard across you all here within the committee, that there probably is industries and sectors where folks are going to always hit the max, and certain sectors where they may not.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Ramfis?
I think Jeffrey beat me to the punch on one question, but you know, I think I probably could go on just talking about the workforce pieces. For the interest of time, I think for the record, I'll just say I think there's a lot of room to work and improve the workforce section. But just to highlight things that maybe we're missing, that I think we've heard feedback from public comments, from experts in this field, is just consideration around the quality of installation. I'm not sure if it's satisfactorily incorporated here, but I think research shows that the quality installation of, say, like insulation, any energy efficiency retrofits has shows a true outcome in the actual true energy savings for any type of building. And so I think I think for an industry that where you definitely have top performers in quality installation and folks who just aren't, I think it's important to factor that in. It sound like Energy Trust has some kind of a component to factor quality installation, but I think it's something in the future, at least from the public comments, is something we might want to consider, whether it's through the RFP or through the workforce and contractor agreement, or maybe technical review. But it does seem like in the best interest of PCEF to ensure that we're factoring in just quality installation or whatever be relevant for each different type of sector that we would be reviewing. I'll end my comments there. Just thought it was something that we may have missed based on public feedback.
Maybe if I could just make one quick comment on that, Ramses. And does anybody else hear me echoing, or is that just me?
Katie, one thing is we never got your phone actually connected, and we can figure that out in the break. But I was just going to share that you're probably hearing echoes because.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to try and ignore that. But if I seem to lose my train of thought, that's what's going on. So, we definitely, and everyone, have our eye on protecting public safety and the sort of health of the occupants in the buildings that PCEF projects might happen in, or the infrastructure that people are around, and anticipate primarily dealing with that through requirements in the grant agreements and through kind of verification efforts on the back end. But that's absolutely something that we're keyed into. So Faith, it's your turn again.
All right, thank you. Mine was regarding the greenhouse gas reduction calculation, and I love the solution that you all found. So I just wanted to appreciate you in that staff's going to do that calculation and take that off the plate of others. So I really, really appreciate that. You've said that you're going to do that off of information provided in the project scoping section. And I'm assuming that you're getting it through Appendix A. I just didn't have a link to Appendix A, so you get, okay, great. So you got that information. And in the guidelines, when we provide this to applicants, I hope that we also reference the particular calculator that's being used so that people can also, if they want to, do their own calculation and see how they'll score. So I see head nods, all that's taken care of, fantastic, thank you.
It's getting taken care of, but yes, that's absolutely what we anticipate doing.
Thanks.
Andrea?
Well, I just want to say I think that this has gotten a lot tighter in the last few weeks, and I really appreciate the work in this a lot. And I also appreciate that we're at the very beginning of what is going to be a multiple year iterative process on trying to figure out how do we get resources in the hands of the communities who we intend to benefit from this. Sam, you mentioned that there was an intention to do a survey for applicants about the application process itself. And I'd be curious to know a little bit more about the timing of that.
Andrea, this is a great question. everything on it, I guess maybe it's a reflection of the fact that we've talked a lot about the experience for applicants. And I mean, this has been something that this committee has talked about. The experience for applicants is, it's just as important as sort of the outcomes that we have within the program itself. In that's a lot of the feedback and a lot of the early presentations were, make sure that this is something that is approachable for folks. And so in terms of the time, we haven't squared away those details yet. I mean, a lot of our work has been focused on getting you all here so that we can start to turn inward now and start laying out a whole range of pieces, that some of which obviously have been chugging along sort of in the background around just the application development, all that sort of stuff. But I know that we've got to check in as a team and still figure out what is the appropriate timing around all of this, including that sort of survey. So if you have thoughts and suggestions here, we welcome them, because I wanted to not leave that unsaid, in that is just as big a part of this, that us making sure that we are actually understanding how folks interact with this and how do we make this better next year is important. It's going to be important for us to get that feedback. So I said it here knowing that that's something that we've long planned, but we haven't actually planned that out. We haven't actually sketched that out.
Right. And I part of me wants to say, like, great, you'll get to it. That's fantastic. And it'll inform next year's application. And part of me wants to say, boy, do it before the applications are like due date. And the reason is, if we have really missed something critical for our core organizations in this application process, and we get feedback from that survey about a particular question or set of questions that would help us understand how to review applications, it might be good to know. Like I'm thinking about when you write a set of questions and scoring criteria for a job interview, for example, and you get to the first interview and somebody like totally like misses a question, and you're like, that applicant missed the question. And then 4 applicants later, you're like, every applicant missed the question. It was the question, not the applicants. I think that's the kind of thing where if we're getting feedback from a particular group of organizations, that there's a way that this process has alienated them, it might be good to know that going into scoring.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate that. I think that's something that we can turn to. I mean, and I think that's something we can incorporate as part of the application itself. And know that throughout this process, there will be, I mean, just so you all know, there will be, I know we haven't figured out what frequency we will have them, but there will be Q&A sessions where, as part of that, we will be taking all those clarifying questions, answering those, and then publishing them for the public. So I think there will be a certain amount of that will happen in real time, just as we're getting certain questions consistently, and so we will be pushing that information out. But I also appreciate what you're saying there, and I think that there's probably something we can do that isn't going to be that complicated, but that may just be a quick addendum after. There's something to going through a long application and not wanting to have to deal with the survey right afterwards, but there's probably something we can figure out in order to make it approachable.
Ramsey?
I think there's a comment kind of jumping off of Andrea's comment that kind of registered some of the feedback that as I was reviewing some of the comments, that might be worth revisiting in the future, which is, I think there's a recognition that there is going to be organizations that shine really well when it comes to a written application. And I think for other groups, it's more about that person-to-person interaction. And so I think from a design perspective, we are really leaning towards really good writers. And I think the only way to balance that is opportunities, whether it's site visits or presentations. I know we have some kind of factor here to allow applicants to be able to respond based on their scores. I think it's something, I think from what I gathered from some of the comments is thinking through just the limitations of a written application, and thinking more about a more transformative relationship with prospective applicants. Happy to revisit and uplift some of those comments where I read that, but again, I know it's a challenge to do that this year, but I think it's definitely something I'm really interested to just find creative ways to uplift organizations that might not be good writers, that we might have an inherent bias, and thinking about different intimate ways to deliver more money.
Thanks, Renfis. Did everybody catch that, Renfis? You were fading out a little bit at the end.
Oh no. Long story short, just finding different ways to interact with applicants outside of a written application. I think we, whether we know it or not, we have some kind of a bias on different writing styles. And the way our application is designed, it has some inherent jargon that I think applicants are expected to conform to our jargon. That I think the only way to balance our bias beyond bias training, if you will, is offering other opportunities for applicants to shine, whether it's like a more of a person-to-person or a group interaction, or videos. You know, I think just being creative in the future in the design of how we can allow applicants to shine outside of just a written design RFP, if you will.
So I think love to hear if there are other comments, but if there aren't, I'd love to, and this could be, we'd love to see if there, I don't know what sort of action this needs to be, but we'd love to, we would love to entertain a proposal if there is one. And I don't know if it, I think given this format, it may make sense to just, well, stop there.
Robin?
Yeah, I just have a question. I provided some comments in paper or more in electronic form, and Katie, you and I spoke about that a little earlier today. I think most of those comments are clarification in nature, but kind of curious, how do those comments, you know, if we're about to propose something, how do those comments get reflected, or what's the overall process for continuing changes that will happen? Sam, you mentioned there'll still be some wordsmithing stuff going on. So, you know, when do the, you know, the wordsmithing and typos is obviously very appropriate to edit, but, you know, there's a gray area as to, there may be some changes that are a little bit beyond just clarification and typos.
I mean, at the moment, the expectation really is that the focus is really, it is really just clarification, typos, and ease of use. So we would not, and I'm trying to, you know, I went through, I mean, we did go through the comments that came through. We wouldn't be changing any content itself. As part of the full application, you would see just the layout and other elements of it, but you'd also see some of the elements of the grant agreements that we would clearly call out in advance that would be relevant to everyone. So there's I think some of the comments would be captured. I think some of the comments, I mean, and having reviewed your comments, Robin, would be addressed in the grant agreements. And so that we will bring that when we bring the rest of the RFP forward. But we're not going to be making changes to the actual content itself.
And just a little bit of clarification. So by content, really what we're talking about is like the intent of the question, the intent of the scoring. We're not asking for approval on like the specific words that are in every single question, the specific words that are in every single piece of scoring guidance, because we recognize that we're still working with the comms team and working with other folks to try and create a product that is a lot more accessible than it currently is. But so what we're kind of checking in on is the substance there? Like, is the substance of the application questions, are we getting the information that we want to be getting, and the scoring guidance, are we scoring it in the way that we want to be scoring it? And so just a little bit of clarification, I guess, on what we mean by content.
Thank you, Katie. Megan?
Yeah, actually, my question was pretty similar to Robin's, so maybe you've answered it, but just that I offered a lot of like small comments over email, And so, yeah, I think perhaps, I think you've already answered my question, but I guess I would say that I'm grateful for all the work that you all have done to refine and revise this. I do think it's a lot tighter, as Andrea said. I think it's been responsive to community needs. I don't think it's perfect, but I also think perfect would be an impossible goal right now. So I feel comfortable with sort of moving forward, but I do wonder, a couple of my comments were a little bit more, and maybe the more like substantive realm. And I don't necessarily feel that my comment is the thing that should be changed, but it is a little different than just like fixing a typo. But I feel confident in giving staff 9 sets of comments and saying, we'll look forward to a final version that we can look through one more time.
Okay, and I would say, Megan, that because we haven't, I don't think that Sam has either, we haven't had an opportunity to look at the comments that you emailed in. If there are things that are like really, truly substantive that you think would be worth a conversation, I think bringing them up now would be a good use of the kind of the time and the platform. If there are things that you think kind of staff can address, then we can do that. We can sort of go in that direction.
That helps clarify. I think for the most part, it's stuff that I'd like a response to, just to track from my own individually. To me, I don't necessarily think it needs to be a full 9-person committee discussion right now in our meeting time. And I trust staff to like respond to my thought. So if maybe we can meet this week and just kind of track it all, so that when I see the final, I kind of know if you chose to ignore my thought, why.
Yeah,
that's how absolutely. I would stand on it. I don't feel like I need to bring anything up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glancing at your questions now, Megan, and I think we certainly can. I think we can certainly follow up and just talk through these, because I think a lot of these, I think these are most of these. I think they're exactly that we should be able to just talk through and reflect how we've thought about these.
Great, thank you.
I saw your hand go up and down.
I just wanted to convey, I want to definitely hear what Megan has to offer, but it sounds like wanted that as a commitment.
Yeah, and maybe just sort of pointing out what's on the slide, that the committee will approve the final request for a proposal, which will have kind of the final actual exact link going to be in the application, and that's going to be in the scoring guidance, and that is also going to be sort of the guidance document that's available for applicants. And so there will be an opportunity to look at that, but we need kind of approval to move forward with the substance of what we've got, so that we don't end up kind of having to backtrack with a larger team of folks who are helping us kind of create accessibility and put together the final product. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's hard to read. It's hard to read the entirety, Megan. I'm not gonna. But if there is a specific idea, if there's that substantive comment or two, I'd certainly welcome discussing it now if it makes sense. I just realized I just opened up the actual document. There will be no comments.
Sorry, I don't mean to make this a back and forth about me. I was mostly just kind of clarifying a similar question to Robin, which was, I offered some kind of fine tuning over email. I think most of it's fine tuning. I don't necessarily know. Perhaps maybe the one that's like not one that's, a couple where that I still was questioning points allocation, although I appreciate that they seem simpler now to me as a reviewer and if I were a grant applicant. Like, yeah, sometimes it's simpler so I appreciated that, but then some of me was like, I think I needed to see that pie chart one again, the one you showed us, Katie, on here, because there wasn't like a summative table. So I maybe also got lost a little bit on like, what is this worth again? So that might be, but the point I made isn't necessarily the one we need to talk about. I just was like questioning that again. Are these all adding up? And then a lot of them were small, but the other big one I brought up again, and I think we've talked about it a lot, so I'm a little reluctant to bring it up, but when we talk about the PCEF, the priority population specified in the PCEF code, and I know we've talked about this in a lot of different angles, but one, it just occurred to me as we were reading this all that we're asking for all these numbers on women, women, women over and over, and other categories, but women, and then also people with disabilities. And I guess under people with disabilities, we're just letting the organizations define that. That's probably fine. But under women, I just wonder if we can be a little more inclusive somehow. I know that's not in the PCEF code language, but I wonder if we can signal to our applicants that we mean all women, all people who identify as women, including, you know, non-binary, transgender, non-cis women. That occurred to me as something that when you read it, it starts to just sound very, you know, binary. So that's a thought. I know it's kind of late to bring that thought up, so that's why I'm not sure it's worth a conversation right now. But and the point on people with disabilities, I think I've raised this before, but I think we're just letting folks define that themselves, right? Yeah.
Yes, on disabilities, yes, letting folks define it themselves.
And on women. I mean, we're letting people define for themselves in all categories.
Okay, it might just be worth it to say that somewhere. Like,
yeah.
In which case, I think all my other comments are pretty small and not worth a. You know, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Megan, I mean, I've had a chance to just screen through right now, just a good chunk of them. I think for the most part, most of those we should be able to come back and follow up and answer them, because I think we spoke to them, and it's just, I will acknowledge there's a lot of pieces here in this document, and so I know that as we sort of move one thing one place, and then some of the things we move to grant agreements, I agree. What I'm seeing here is this, just I see you reckoning with where some of these changes have been made. I think with the overall, some of your comments around the points, what I'm just seeing here is that, you know, what I want to bring it back to is we still, and it's sort of what we spoke to in our last committee meeting, where we spoke to the overall points actually going to PCEF priority populations, that in some places the points seem small, but collectively there is, when you're focused on a PCEF priority population, there is sort of, if you're focused and reflect the community and have demonstrated experience serving PCEF priority populations, there is about almost 50 points that you can get for doing that. So I think that just reflecting that comment around the points comment there. So.
Ranfis?
I just want to bump up Megan's suggestion around just being more inclusive around gender and recognizing it's non-binary. So any way that we can update language on that, I think it's never too late, never too early. So any way, any areas that we can do that, I think we should aim for being inclusive.
Okay. I think we can do that. And I want to check in with the team. There's a conversations we did have earlier this week. I don't know where they entirely landed, so appreciate what we're hearing here, and I think we can do that. That's very great. I mean, and I think the focus being that we would just be very clearly calling out that when we say women, it's anyone who identifies as women, and I think we've got to do a little bit of our work to make sure we're appropriately speaking to that, but making sure that we're inclusive in the definition of women.
Yeah, I would say the only piece of the conversation that I would want to kind of highlight for committee members, just so that we're clear on expectations, is there at one point the table that we had where we asked the applicants to sort of fill in their board and staff demographics to see if they reflect the community they serve. That table has been edited 500 times, and eventually just kind of got, we just took the categories that were in the code and put it in there, because there are so many different ways to characterize all of the various identities that, you know, humans have, and it was just getting kind of unmanaged. It was getting really hard to manage for the purposes of like translating that into, is it meeting the intent of the code and the intent of the program. But I think that there is a lot that we can do in terms of the language that we use around that table. But I just want to make sure that that there's not an expectation, I guess, that we expand that table to be much more disaggregated, because I think that where we're at right now with that table is pretty good. But I do think that there's a lot of language that can go around it and throughout the application and in the guidance to make it clear that we're having a more expansive kind of definition of women and just more inclusiveness generally. That feels okay. Okay, good.
And maybe what I'd point you all to is there's a memo that Katie sent last week just around some of the draft large grant criteria, which I think offers just a little bit more clarity around some of the changes and suggestions we're making, and some of them are future looking. So I just want to point folks to that, because I know that memo did speak to some of the changes that were made and where we see our ability to better address some of those. I mean, and some related to, anti-displacement and the anti-displacement question. So because we did start to see sort of where we see our ability to pull in really the rest of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and being able to tease that apart, but really pushing that out to next year.
I wonder if we could get a temperature check from folks about how they would feel about we've been through the large grant application. We have certainly been through the workforce and contractor benefits section iteratively. So do folks feel like they have enough comfort to allow us to move forward with kind of calling the substance of this final and moving into kind of final drafting phase? And if it's okay, I'd just like to call on each of you individually and get an idea of if you're comfortable with that. And I'm going to start with Ramfis because you just appear first for me in my window.
I think, I don't want actually be the barrier in this application.
We're losing you a little, Ramfis.
Oh no.
Okay.
Can you all hear
me now? When you lean in, it seems to be good.
Sorry about that. I'll try to move forward. I think, obviously, personally, I would spend more time on workforce if I could, but I don't want this to be the barrier to slow down the application. I think we should recognize that there are going to be mistakes and lessons learned for this first year, and I think all good products take time to build together. And I think in the spirit of just continuing to move forward, just want to, I think, just encourage that we just continue moving forward on the process.
Okay. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I'm okay with moving forward with this. But like Rafi said, I mean, if we're going to make mistakes, we know that going forward. We've gone through this pretty, I think, thoroughly at this point. So I think we can move forward with it.
All right, thanks. Megan?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I feel good that it's how it's come along, and I look forward, I feel confident moving forward, and we'll see another round, and then we'll learn from our applicants what to improve for next time. So I feel okay moving forward. Warm temperature check.
Okay, thanks. Maria?
Yeah, I don't feel pretty strongly about any one particular option. I know there's different pros and cons for directions we could go in. I guess I'm seeing that we're somewhat based on people's feelings, we may somewhat still be distributed on a normal bell curve based on where we're at, but I'm wondering, do we need to reach some kind of modified consensus now before we move things to a proposal? And what can we do between now and then to get on a stronger position or page together? Is that just not something we're aiming for? Because I know a lot of us may settle for yeah, this is good enough, but Is that what we want to shoot for essentially? Or I still really care to hear about other people's like strong feelings about it, but I know other people might not want to continue on about certain things that we feel like we've discussed a lot.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just gonna, if it's okay, kind of get everybody else's temperature check, and then I think that we should go back to that and maybe talk about some of the areas where it does feel like the group is not particularly, like in the tightly bunched in terms of their opinion. But Robin?
I'm generally good with things. I think to sound off some of the other comments I made, I think, for first pass, this is, year one. I think we're largely there. It's not perfection. If we wanted perfection, we'll be here until midnight and beyond. So I think, given everything that we've done, deliberated, got feedback, and given our timeline, I'm okay moving forward.
Right. Andrea?
I mean, I think this is just the first year. I think we've made good improvements with feedback, and I'm happy to move forward.
Faith?
Yeah, maybe mine will be slightly stronger, even than what we've heard. I feel really good about where we are. Of course, it's not perfect. I don't think we can achieve that. But I really love that we have been responsive and that we all have a commitment to continuing to be responsive and to adapt when we hear comments of anything that was unexpected, or just that we're not serving as fully as we could the people that we intend these grants to be for. So I feel good with where we are, and also very good with the commitment of revisiting when we hear feedback that it's not quite up to par. So thanks.
Thanks, Faith. Michael?
I'd like to start by saying this is maybe one of the best things that's come out of 2020 for me so far. I don't know if that's a really low bar or
yeah.
I really appreciate all the work that everybody's put into this. I've learned a lot through this. I of course have my concerns about ease of use, accessibility. I'm hoping that in the end of this, at the end of the application, you'll have a glossary defining things like BIPOC and utilization and disaggregated information, whatever other terms that will be in this final one that might not make all the sense in the world. So I hope that there's something at the end, a glossary of terms that we use for the people that are using on the other end that are applying. But I think that workforce and contractor equity has had. I still feel like it's had a lot of input from contractors and not a lot of input from workforce. But I'm pretty warm on this for our first go.
Thanks, Michael. Shanice?
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of these comments. I think that the journey that we've taken to arrive here, we've made a lot of significant detours and improvements, and I think for the most part of where we are, I'm feeling aligned with it. I definitely have some concerns that remain, especially as I reflect on some of the things we've been wrestling with through utilization and the feedback that we've received. And I think I'm sitting with some of the comments too, is it just being our first year, and thinking about what it is that we want this work to accomplish generally, but even in the first year, is a question just I'm reflecting on now, and I'm curious if we can just do that as we continue, not trying to be too ambitious, but also being thoughtful about the system that we put in place.
Mhm. So it seems that there is general agreement on the committee that that the substance of the application and the scoring guidance is sort of ready for staff to take and then move forward with a final draft. There is one area where, the one area where it seems like we continue to have folks on different sides of the spectrum, or kind of organized along a bell curve, is the workforce section. And I would say that I think that it is a reflection of the fact that we have committee members who are bringing your different unique perspectives and professional and life experiences and advocacy positions to this table, and that what we have kind of landed on is a little bit of what feels like a compromise. And so it's not exactly a consensus, it's not maybe as satisfying as a consensus, but it may be where we are. It may be where we can get this year, I guess. Sam, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
No. So I don't know that we could, even with further discussion, get closer on the workforce and contractor benefits section. So I wouldn't want to kind of open that section back up again. And I think that given the fact that people feel generally okay with us, warm to good with us moving forward, I'd like to suggest that that is what we should do now. But I would like to ask Maria if that feels okay as a response to the comments that you made.
Yeah, I can move forward with that. I'll probably just reach out to Sam, but I don't have any like red flags or fatal flaws, as you would call them. Sorry, I'm distracted. I'm enjoying the horns outside of my building for Black Lives Matter, and I'm a little distracted because I can barely hear folks on this call. So let me know if you need me to speak up too.
Oh, okay. We can hear you pretty well. Renfis?
Yeah, I just want to agree with that, with your assessment, Katie. I think, and I think to Michael's point, the voice that's less heard. When we think about compromise, it's difficult. What that North Star is without including the voices of workers, and that's I think in any process like this, that's just hard. It's just difficult to do that for every specific sector, whether it's energy efficiency, renewables, agriculture, regenerative agriculture. That's just tough. And I think that's the part that we see and don't see every day. And I think, I think until we're able to do that work or have the capacity to do that work, that's just the voice that we don't hear. And those are the real lived experiences that we should be listening to, and that we should be hearing about. What are those barriers to get into the trades or get into this industry? What are the things that keeps them up at night? What are the things that, what are everyday concerns in terms of being able to make ends meet? And I think part of PCEF was able to answer that question, whether it's someone working in affordable housing, or someone working on solar, it's not just being able to partake in climate action, but know that they can make a living wage. And so I think I think PCEF has done. I think the staff has done a really good job in the short amount of time. I think to my point earlier, I think ideally like this would have happened. This process would have started a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. So, but I do hope that we're just in a learning institution that there are best practices out there, and best practices are lived, learned experiences, and those might be in contradiction with the concerns of industries who are finding, workforce equity as a challenge. And I think PCEF is made to make folks feel challenged and feel uncomfortable. Obviously, that challenge and uncomfortability shouldn't be aimed at nonprofit organizations, but it should be folks who have been in the industry for a long time. And I think that's a challenge that even I'm trying to resolve myself as a PCEF committee member is, what are we aiming towards the industry? But what are we not trying to overburden our community members? And that's just a tough thing for me to wrestle. And I realize, like, I think this is a good moment for me personally just to step back and learn as we move on this process.
Thanks, Francis. I think that we can move forward without an official proposal from this committee. You all will be asked to sort of approve the RFP. Sam, does that feel comfortable to you?
We might as well get we've taken the temperature check. I think we might as well get a proposal if folks are willing to move ahead. I think we've heard that, just for the sanctity of following through with the fact that we did the temperature check.
Okay. Anybody interested in putting a proposal up? Robin?
I move to accept the substance of the large grant proposal. I don't know what you want to call it, document that was shared with us.
All right, and I'm just gonna call on each of you and ask you to tell me if you.
We need a second that motion?
No.
Second?
Ramsey seconds it. Now I'm gonna call each of you and get your feelings on this before we go to break. Okay, Jeffrey?
I agree.
Megan?
I agree.
Maria?
Agree.
Andrea?
Agree.
Faith?
I agree.
Michael?
I agree. We'll get to vote again on the final one.
Yep.
I agree.
Shanice?
I agree.
All right. Thank you all for that. We do have about 5 minutes before the break.
I just want to say thank you to the staff and congratulate you for the hard work you've put in, and the lack of vacations and the iterative cranking that we've done and that you've heard from community. I'm really proud of this work, and I'm really grateful for your effort. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to the application subcommittee for all your work. I'm putting all this together and then kind of cutting it all back. Sorry if this seems like a little bit of like you want a champagne toast at the end. Kind of felt like maybe not quite, but I'm excited, even if my voice says I'm not.
We'll get there. We'll get to the champagne toast.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to just, I guess, reiterate that thank you, particularly to the subcommittee who spent a lot of time kind of on working on the initial draft, and then all of you for going through this with us and helping us improve and be better thinkers. So there are 2 things that I'd like to do before break. The first one is to approve the minutes from the last meeting, which I forgot to do at the beginning of the meeting. So I'd like to ask committee members if there are any changes, comments, edits, or corrections to the minutes that were provided for the July 22nd meeting. All right, hearing none, I think that those are approved. And then I think James did you say that you had figured out how to play that video with sound?
I believe that I have, yes.
Okay, well, let's maybe give that one more try. And then once it's done, we can take a 10-minute break.
All right. So there's still time for inspiration here. And let me go ahead and screen share again and hit the right button that will also optimize it for sound. So one moment here. Okay, you should be seeing the screen.
Yep.
We as a nation have a great deal to be thankful for. Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jimmy Lee Jackson, whose death inspired the Selma March, along with so many others, did not make to see this day. But you and I are here. We can bear witness to the distance we have come and the progress we have made in 50 years, and we must use this moment to recommit ourselves to do all we can to finish the work. There's still work left to be done. Get out there and push and pull until we redeem the soul of America. People often ask me, why do you come back? What purpose does it serve? We come to Selma to be renewed. We come to be inspired. We come to be reminded that we must do the work that justice and equality calls us to do. On March 7, 1965, a few innocent children of God, some carrying only a bedroll, a few clutching a simple bag, a plain purse or a backpack, were inspired to walk 50 dangerous miles from Selma to Montgomery to demonstrate the need for voting rights in the state of Alabama. On that day, 600 people marched into history, walking 2 by 2 down the sidewalk, not interfering with the free flow of trade and commerce, not interfering with traffic, with a kind of military discipline. We were so peaceful, so quiet, no one saying a word. We were beaten, tear gas. Some of us was left bloody right here on this bridge. 17 of us were hospitalized that day. But we never became bitter or hostile. We kept believing that the truth we stood for would have the final say. This city, on the banks of the Alabama River, gave birth to a movement that changed this nation forever. Our country will never, ever be the same because of what happened on this bridge.
All right, thank you all. And thank you to John Lewis. And with part of those words, I think they resonate here of there is much work left to be done in so many ways. But we'll take a brief break and then we'll come back and then we'll do some more work. All right.
James.
Thank you, James.
Okay. 7:37. During the break, Sam taught me how to connect my phone right, so now I'm not hearing myself twice, which is great. So the next section of the meeting is we're going to talk about small grants, and then we're going to move into planning grants. And so the small grants, if you all recall, go up, their grants up to $200,000, but can be used for any of the kind of eligible items, eligible types of projects that that large grants would also be used for. We sent you all a draft of the small grant application and small grant scoring criteria, as well as the planning application and scoring criteria earlier today. So we have no expectation that folks have had time to read that. But so mostly what we wanted to do in the small grant section is just highlight for you what the differences are, what the primary differences are between the large grants and the small grant application and scoring criteria. And not kind of avoid getting into the weeds, just recognizing that you haven't had the opportunity to review the documents that we sent you. And then for the planning grants, because they are, the planning grants, the application and the scoring criteria are really substantively different than the large and small grants. We'll go through those. Sam will go through that draft application kind of line by line, the way that we did with the large grants and the scoring criteria as well. So there's just a few slides on the small grants. The sort of level of effort, the added up guidance, again, those are not minimums and maximums, but really just trying to provide some sort of folks with some guideposts if they would find those useful. We're around 5 to 9 pages total, 2 pretty small tables, and then 2 templates, the budget template and then the milestones and tasks template.
Katie, I think you need to share your slides again.
Oh, I can see them just fine. But... Okay, can everybody else see them now? Okay, great. So that is, and then just a couple of other notes about small grants is that there's a little bit of additional intention to ensuring that barriers for new organizations are removed in the small grant application. And that's in no way to imply that we think small organizations should, smaller new organizations are only eligible for small grants and shouldn't and can't have the ability to do large grants, but just also wanting to make sure that there was a kind of an on-ramp for brand new emerging organizations to kind of like help support that development. So we paid a little bit of additional attention to just making sure that those barriers were removed. And also kept in mind kind of the different kinds of projects that we might expect to see at a lower funding level. Probably going to see less construction, more, we expect to see some of the one-off type of projects. For example, there might be nonprofit organizations that own facilities and don't necessarily work in this space, but they provide services to some of the PCEF priority populations and could benefit by lowering their operating costs from doing efficiency work and that sort of thing. So those kind of, but they might not repeatedly apply for PCEF funds. So those kind of one-off projects. And then potentially pilot projects as well. So the next 2 slides, this one is how the application is different from large grants. And this is just at a high level. There are other differences. But The questions that have been removed or reduced are, I just wanted to kind of highlight these for you all to think about. There's the length of time or the record of serving priority populations, and that is an area where we get a healthy number of points in the large grant application. There is still an emphasis on providing points to organizations whose primary purpose is serving PCEF priority populations. But we've eliminated that kind of record. So you don't have to have been doing that work for 3 years in order to get those points for the smaller grants. There's only 1 year of financials that are required instead of 3. We removed the question that had asked for information on permitting and other requirements in the project description and scope. We removed the question about having a plan to ensure project benefits exceed the grant term. And that's where in the large grants, we ask for a plan related to capital improvements or infrastructure, kind of like how we're going to ensure that the benefits of those continue to be felt beyond the life of the grant. And we also removed the question about how health and environmental impacts, including embedded greenhouse gas emissions, are considered in purchasing for the project. And then the primary differences in the scoring between the large and small grants are that we removed points. Again, so there's some repetitiveness here because we removed the question and then the associated points. So we removed the points associated with the length of time serving priority populations for the plan to maintain benefits of the project beyond the life of the grant, and for that material selection choices based on embedded carbon or embedded GHG emissions and other environmental and health impacts, and reduced the value on deep cost reduction to households. And so that's one in the large grants under social benefits. There are a lot of points that are allocated for cost reduction to low income and people of color in their homes, those households. And so those are those points are reduced for the small grants, largely kind of in response to this, largely in anticipation of the fact that there will be a smaller number of construction projects. There'll be that kind of list of who we expect to apply in this space. That's not to say you couldn't have a construction project in this space, you certainly could, but it would be difficult with $200,000 to do really deep retrofits on very many houses to get to that 25% cost reduction that you would need to get to earn full points, as it is in the large grants. And then we adjusted points for greenhouse gas impacts to remove a preference for larger projects. And that is that's the point. That's the criteria where staff calculates the greenhouse gas impact by the sort of reduction or sequestration divided by the total budget of the project. And so we adjusted the percentages, like how much, because that's a race to the top approach, and we adjusted kind of where you had to land to get the 9 points or 8 points or 7 points and like kind of down to 0 points, recognizing that projects that are bigger and can benefit from economies of scale and the efficiencies that go along with that are likely to score better than smaller projects in that regard. So we kind of adjusted those percentages because we didn't want to have that criteria be sort of favoring larger projects so much. So that is all, those are the primary differences that we just wanted to kind of highlight for you in the meeting, but but we didn't anticipate, unless there are any questions right now, having a conversation about the small grants. We wanted to just point out those differences and then move into talking in more detail about the planning grants, and then just ask that you all read through the small grant application and scoring criteria that we sent you, and Robin and Megan, I know that there's a lot of similarities, so it's possible that, you know, where you annotated certain things, you're going to see those same things in the draft of the small grant application and scoring, and just know that, you know, anything will be carried, any kind of fixes will be carried from one to the other as well. And then we'll revisit the small grant application and scoring criteria at next week's meeting. That work for everyone? Robin?
Yeah, do you want comments in advance, and if so, when?
We would love comments in advance, and we were trying to figure out what seemed like a reasonable request. If it would be possible to get us comments by Sunday evening, that would be great. We know that, you know, you all have jobs that you do outside of this volunteer work that you're doing for us. So, but if you could, by the end, does the end of Sunday seem reasonable? I'm seeing some nodding. It is shorter than the large grant, so, okay. Yeah, so if you can get us comments by Sunday evening, then we can incorporate those and redraft so that we can kind of work through at the next committee meeting, which is next Wednesday, and be able to hopefully get to a place where we can, as we did today, have a proposal to move forward into finalizing. Ranfeast?
As we think about comments and feedback, is there like a specific way you're supposed to think about the intended benefits for these small grants? I don't know if it's still the case that it's the intended beneficiaries was supposed to be like smaller or newer organizations. Is it supposed to be the case, or is it meant to be just inclusive for all organizations of all sizes and types, and just to think about that latter end as we provide feedback?
Yeah, so go ahead, Sam. Oh, you're muted.
I think it's hard and imperfect to find the perfect time, but I think as we were thinking about small grants and as, you know, as we're sort of just hearing initial queries and questions around folks' proposals and their thoughts, I think what we're expecting to see is and I think it'll be interesting to walk through the planning grants. You're going to see organizations that are a little further away from sort of their idea going into planning grants. I think there is certain sect of group of organizations that have their idea, and it's really, they want to use the small grants for a pilot. They sort of want to use it to pilot and work through a proposal or an idea, and then come back and apply for the large grants, assuming they can sort of make a demonstration at a smaller scale. So I think you'll see some of that. I also think those one-offs is going to be where you see the small grant. It's because the reality is most construction projects are going to be coming over 200,000, but you will see some individual and when I think at a commercial scale, maybe not necessarily residential, but even residential proposals will be proposals for projects over 200,000 since they'll do them over across multiple sites. So I think that you would see, as Katie mentioned, nonprofit-owned buildings. There's plenty of those that are thinking about various deferred maintenance upgrades that they could do that would fit squarely within small grants. So I feel like there's a few case types that you can kind of keep in mind. But I don't think that it would necessarily only be small organizations. I think you're going to see some small, but certainly equally some large organizations too.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that I think that Megan has mentioned before is that, we probably expect to see some of the regenerative agriculture. It's likely that because they're just not as big an industry, because there hasn't been sort of funding available in that space, that some of those might come in slightly smaller, at least at the beginning.
And so just
okay.
as a reminder to that, the small grants build off of all the changes we started with all the changes we made into the large grants, and then we pared back from there. So the starting place with small grants isn't the previous small grants, but it was the large grant and paring back from the large grants. So some things will still linger, but I think that I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing to keep in mind, and I'll stop sharing because Sam, I think that you're going to pull up the planning grant document now. I guess the only other thing to keep in mind is that this is a space where there's less risk associated with the dollars going out the door just because there's a smaller number of dollars. And so that's one of the rationales behind removing requirements and making it a little bit less burdensome and kind of less tightly controlled that way. Okay, we can see your screen, Sam.
Okay. And Ryan, please.
The only comment I have, and I'll have this in my written feedback, at least for the small grants, I think as you remove.
Come closer, Ramfis, if you can.
I should probably call in. I think my only feedback here is on the small grants is as you remove the historical work with priority populations and remove some of the restrictions, you might be creating an incentive for businesses to become nonprofit social enterprises. I think it's just something to track in the future. But that's something I just want to flag is I think we may have just sent a market signal for folks to not create their own nonprofit organization. That's not as difficult as you think it would be, but it's just something for us to think about as a design as we move forward.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think some of these questions will seem familiar, and as you see that, just know that sort of the small grants really fit squarely in sort of the middle between large and planning grants. And so what we'll do here is we'll walk through here, different from the way we usually walk through. We'll walk through all of the questions first, so you sort of see them and as a cohesive group of just questions before we move to the scoring criteria. I'm not going to go through the eligibility criteria since those are just eligibility questions, and those are generally fairly consistent with what was in the large grant checklist. But I'll start with the organizational information question and just chat about some of the differences between the large grant and small grant. So first question, Robin.
Yeah, quick question. Can you remind me the amounts that we're talking about again?
Yeah, so planning grants go up to $100,000, and the expectation is that these projects would generally be completed within a year. That's sort of the signal at least we're sending, but folks can certainly say that they need more time. They've got a project that's going to take more than a year, and that's fine. And small grants up to 200,000 and large grants from 200,000 to $1 million. And so, and then just to contrast it on the other end, we have the application support grants and mini grants, which would be up to 5,000. So it sort of all fits on various spectrum of where you are and the types of projects you want to develop. So the first question on planning grants is, what is your organization's mission? Second question is in the same question. This question was asked, purpose or mission, apologies. And this same question was asked for small grants and large grants. Second question is, describe your organization, how your organization prioritizes and serves one or more of the PCEF priority populations. Include which populations you serve and what % of your organization's work is focused on serving that population. If applicable, include any supporting documents. So here, noticeable, we do not ask about how long they have been serving a particular priority population. It's really focused on who they currently prioritize and what portion of their organization's work. The question is really focused on what portion of the organization's work that priority focus represents. This question is third question is no different than the other applications. It's briefly describe your organization's approach and experience with community outreach, organizing, and/or stakeholder engagement. So this question remains consistent across all the applications. This fourth question is the proposed project designed to primarily benefit any of the PCEF priority populations? If you are, and sort of we asked folks to describe that, but if they do benefit PCEF priority population, we then expect them to answer and continue on to answer questions around the demographics of their organization. And this is connected because you can only get the points for reflecting the community you serve if the community you serve is a PCEF priority population. For instance, if an organization says, our project is serving all of Portland, and so our board and our staff is representative of all of Portland, you don't get points for that. But if an organization is representing, and that's the reason, so that's just the reason the question is structured that way. And this is the same and consistent with the small grant as well as the large grant. Okay.
So one thing that is different here from the small and large just is that we are not asking about benefits paid to employees or benefits offered to employees.
Okay. I'm going to scroll through, because we've seen this table, I am going to scroll through acknowledging that there's still changes that we're going to be making, obviously, here through the large grant and small grant in terms of just providing more guidance around an inclusive in a more inclusive way of describing women, or a term to call in women in a more inclusive way. Okay. Next question is, actually, this just relates to the table, and this is the same question. This is around if essentially if the table it asks for folks to provide a little bit more detail. So and this is the same question exists within large grants as well as small grants, but at the table above we had we'd asked for, just for instance, your categories around percentage of your board, your senior leadership, your staff that are people of color. But if you want to say, no, my organization serves in the indigenous community, and this is what my board reflects. That next question is an opportunity to answer that. And provide just more focus on who you're targeting. Once we move into the organizational financials, we just asked to describe how the organization will manage and account for spending of grant funds, and if they're applying with a fiscal sponsor, which we suspect many on the planning grant side would be. Provide a description of the budget management and financial controls agreement between the applicant organization and the fiscal sponsor. Include roles and responsibilities. We ask them, and there's a couple of questions, but what you'll see here is we don't ask them to fill out their budget or their revenues and their income and their expenses in our chart. We just ask them to submit 1 year, their current board approved operating budget and the most recent completed year financial statements. Katie, remind me, I feel like there's another question here that may be missing. I'm not sure I've captured it, in addition to the removal of that table.
Yeah, the only other question was sort of if there are things in your financials like you have an operating deficit or audit findings or some significant changes, there's sort of an opportunity to explain that.
That's right. Okay, once we move on, so that's the organizational capacity section, and really where you'll see the biggest, so a lot of that, most of that section, really that organizational background was fairly similar in the other applications. Where you'll see the biggest changes here is in the project description and scope. So first question is just briefly describe the project you will be planning with this grant and how it addresses climate change and social justice. Second question is just tell us why you're doing this project, this planning project. Describe the issue you hope to address, how the issue is identified, and how the planning grant will help address this issue. So the first is sort of what are you doing? And the second question is why are you doing it? And then we get into really the scope, and it's describe the timeline. What's the proposed start and end date? What are the outcome or result of the planning grant? What will it be? And describe the planning process. Tell us what you're going to do, include any description of any known partners or as well as any known activities, including research, technical, professional, consultation, meetings, and events, and community engagement. And the last question in the section is just what are the known potential challenges to success of the proposed planning process and how will you address them? Experience and qualifications of the team. As we move into that section, you'll see this first question is the same for small and planning grants. It's just describe how the professional and lived life experience of the project team will help the proposed planning process be successful. So I'm not going to read the rest of that, but it aligns with the way we reformatted the large grant and small grant questions. The difference here is E2 we're just asking them, instead of providing a resume of the project manager, we're just asking them to provide 1 or 2 paragraph bios for the primary staff that the applicant or who'll be working on the project from the applicant organization, and any contractors and partners if already identified. And then the last question here is just completing the budget template. So those are the questions. So I want to, before we move into the scoring, that captures the questions. So you'll see I mean, it was a simpler document from the outset. When we went into the public comment process, we've simplified it even further in response to some of the comments, and making sure that this was a more simple entry point for potential applicants. And so as we go through the scoring, I think some questions may come up in just in terms of where we get the information. And so I'll move into scoring if there aren't any questions about the questions themselves, and see if there are thoughts or questions around scoring that come up. Okay. So the overview, what you'll see is you can get a total of 45 possible points for the organizational background. You can get a total of 45 possible points for project description and scope, and a total of 10 points for the budget. Within the organizational information, organizational background, first scoring criteria, and this is the same as the others, is that the organization purpose supports PCEF goals of providing benefit to people with low income, people of color, women, people with disabilities, and people who are chronically underemployed. So this connects to that second question, which was just around what are the populations your organization serves, and how much, or do you have any priority populations, and how much of your organization's work does that priority population represent? So if the organization's primary purpose is to focus on delivering programs for priority populations, you get full 8 points here. Next point is focused on organization demonstrating understanding and practice around community engagement, particularly focused on historically marginalized and culturally diverse communities. So you get the full 7 points if engagement reflects an understanding of historically marginalized communities the organization serves, and if applicable, engagement activities are informed by cultural competence, principles of inclusion, and/or collaboration. You'll see this is very similar to the other end. The points look differently, but similar to the other grants. Substantial points here for staff and the board of the organization reflecting the community the proposed project is intended to benefit. And I have to just, the caveat here is you only get these points if your proposed project is intended to benefit a priority population. And so in order to get the full points, at least a majority, 51% of staff, the majority of the board, majority of senior leadership need to reflect the community the proposed project is intended to benefit. Sure, I'm going to just pull the last 3 criteria here from this section. Got 5 points for the application demonstrating the ability to manage funds responsibly and effectively. And so this criteria is written differently, and Acadia may ask you to speak to that. Revenues, you get the full points if revenues are not less than expenditures without reasonable explanation, no audit finding of material weakness, strong budget management practices, clearly defined areas of control, authority over the budget, consistent financial reporting practices, strong board oversight.
Yeah, there's not huge differences in the way that it's written. It's a little bit less specific than with the large grant application, and we only ask for 1 year of financials. There will be kind of like additional guidance if folks apply through a fiscal sponsor, as we have kind of heard from a number of folks who are interested in planning grants that they might. Because we do want to make sure that, you know, people are connecting with a fiscal sponsor who has good financial management practices.
Because we will, these questions are going to be relevant to their fiscal sponsor, since they will be ultimately responsible for the grant.
Yeah.
Okay. The project team including nonprofit staff, contractors, and other partners have the relevant experience. So not just the applicant, but 5 full points of the project team members that have been identified have professional and/or life experience successfully implementing projects that share common characteristics of the proposed project. If applicable, application includes plan to secure additional project team members with appropriate experience. So you don't necessarily have identified everyone, but you need to be able to recognize that you need other people in your project to successfully complete it. Recognize and address that and call that out. Here are the full points. And then we provided in this particular grant, we provided additional points for a smaller organization. And so points awarded to organizations that have fewer than 6 full-time FTE employees or have been in operation for fewer than 3 years. So we just wanted to make sure that we're able to provide an extra nudge for smaller organizations. And so there's an additional set of points for small organizations or emerging organizations. Moving into the project description and scope, this is really the next, this is the rest of the points substantively before we move to the budget. So the opportunity statement and the goal of the planning is clear and compelling. You get 12 points here. It's clear. So, you know, roughly a little bit over a quarter of the points here. So it is clear from the opportunity statement that the applicant has a firm understanding of the issue they intend to address. The primary population will benefit from the project. And the primary population who will benefit from the project have been identified in our PCEF priority populations. The scope of the planning process is clear and manageable, gets you 20 points. So objectives are clear. If applicable, identified partners are appropriate. Outreach and engagement activities are well described. Research analysis needs have been identified and described. Potential barriers have been identified, and the plan to overcome them is included. This really relates to a lot of the scoping questions. 5 points for the timeline being reasonable. And then 8 points for the future project being planned addressing climate change and social justice issues. So the project being planned is in strong alignment with both climate and social justice objectives. So
and one thing,
I'm going to zoom out of this so you can see it all in its entirety here. Yeah.
Ahead, just real quick, if I could interject, there is, because we didn't go through the eligibility screenings, because I think y'all have seen them a bunch of times, but there is one difference on the eligibility screening for the planning grants, and that it sort of, at the beginning, we asked kind of which funding area the project that they're planning for would fall into. So I just wanted to note that, because this is the only other place in the scoring where kind of this connection with climate change and social justice fits in, but they will have already had to indicate that they're planning to apply or planning a project that will be a clean energy project or regenerative ag or green infrastructure. So one of our funding buckets.
Thank you, Gary. So that is, so right, just to make that really clear, that's, it's in effect, it's a core criteria in order to apply for a planning grant, the intention that that's the focus area. So we're not necessarily placing points on that being the focus areas, and to apply for a planning grant, it should be your focus area. It's more of a requirement. I'm going to just stay here for a little bit so this thing's in, because it really does capture the weight of beyond, once we move beyond sort of the organization's background and experience and reflection of the community they're planning to serve, this is where the points exist and fall for planning grants.
Robin?
Yeah, for this last one, the future project being planned, can you give an example where they may not get the full 8 points?
Yeah, I think that the example that's given in the screen is, so I'm just going to use that one. It's just that it might be a project that is really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but doesn't have a strong social justice component. So to get full points, there would need to be strong alignment with both climate and social justice objectives. I can't really think of anything more specific right now.
No, thank you. That helps.
Okay. Megan?
Yeah, I similarly, that's the point I honed in on. And my reflection is simply that 8 points seems low out of 100 for that, because ultimately we want all of the projects to be doing those things. So I guess I'm just like wondering if 8 is the right number for what we expect all of the projects to do, or if there's like another way, if there's another funnel that's happening somewhere. And then another question is, I like that those are addressed together. And I'm trying to think if there'd be any benefit to pulling them apart at all, but I think maybe together. I'm just wondering, yeah. So I think I've answered that in my own head. But yeah, 8 seems low when we want all the projects to do that. So is there another umbrella funnel that I'm not aware of?
It is. I'm going to just screen back to the top. It's not a funnel, but it really is that eligibility. And apologies for jumping around. So it's just this question here. PCEF planning grants must be used to plan for projects that support climate action and social justice within one of the categories of funding listed below. What type of future project is this planning for? And we'll have descriptions of what fits within these, acknowledging that some folks are going to be pushing certainly the boundaries that we understand around these. But so this is sort of, it's not a funnel. I don't know if it's a funnel, Megan. It's more of a yes, no, and then so there is a core expectation that all the projects are in some sense addressing this, but I can acknowledge that it may not always be entirely black and white around this. And so then the scoring really is the degree to which they're addressing, the degree to which they're meeting the collective objectives.
I guess the only other thing that I might add to that, and then Faith does have her hand up, is that one of the, I think when we're thinking about the future projects, we were just trying to kind of acknowledge that there might be a lot of uncertainty around that. And so we didn't want to put too many kind of points associated with something that is in the future and therefore uncertain. And also to create space for folks to go through a planning process and discover that what they originally thought they were going to do actually wasn't the best thing to do, and they should be doing something slightly different. Faith?
Sorry, I was looking for my mute button. Katie, you definitely anticipated my original question, which is, what if we have a great application that doesn't address social justice or climate change, which you addressed by pointing to the eligibility requirements. And so now I'm looking at the document you guys sent us today, and because I can see it more clearly here. And we say in the eligibility, like this needs to be for projects that support climate action and social justice within one of the comments below. But then we point to these aren't necessarily social justice outcomes, right? They're the greenhouse gas reduction project areas, the project areas. So I think that I'm getting there, but I'm just thinking about the points and thinking where we get to the requirement of social justice outcomes is in who do you serve, and then in this 8-point section, right? Also, it's a little bit awkward to me that we ask in the one up above it, the opportunity statement, where we tie that the opportunity is clear and compelling, that we also list as an example for full points that it's serving a priority population. Because those seem like two different things that we've added to the same question, which maybe we're okay with, but it could be confusing.
Ranfis?
Yeah, can folks hear me? I switched to phone. So, yeah, I think I like this question around social justice. You know, I kind of wonder if around, around organization description, where organizations are talking about themselves. So, I think the way that the scoring's framed up, it's framed around like, are folks knowledgeable or working with, priority communities. I think if we were to follow our PCEF guiding principles, I think it would ask the question, is that enough? Should we be asking, should there be an additional criteria that we're evaluating, such as an organization's approach to system analysis around systems change? So I think there's a lot of groups that are serving the community that are really thinking about how they transform the lives for the populations that they serve, that this could be an area that they can shine. So kind of just pose that question here, but yeah, I think it's right here in this section around engagement reflects on understanding of the historical marginalized communities the organization serves. If applicable, engagement activities are informed by cultural competence, principles of inclusion, and/or collaboration. Probably one thing I would add there is maybe like thoughts around systems change or thoughts around addressing the root causes of, oppression, things that I think have created historical barriers for our communities. I think some of these organizations can articulate better and offers them an opportunity to shine, opposed to maybe organizations that haven't historically done this work.
I'm going to scroll up, Ramses, and just see if maybe if there's a way. I'm going to scroll up to project description and scope questions, because we do have this opportunity or problem statement, and I'm wondering if there is something there which is going to tell us why you want to do this planning project, describe the issue you hope to address, how was the issue identified, and how will the planning grant help address this issue or opportunity?
Yeah, it may be the case that someone offers that as an answer, but I think the way that the evaluation criteria is framed, we can't really score on that analysis. We're really framed to score on the current description.
Gotcha. I'm going to scroll down back to that. Apologies. I'll look away from the screen for a minute.
So I guess, for example, if an applicant wanted to say they wanted to transform the lives of previously incarcerated women workers on this type of planning project, whether it's transportation or solar, and they provide an analysis around working on this community and how they think this project could sort of begin what their analysis is in working with that community, that's a potential score. And that kind of connects, I think, to maybe this future-facing score. Again, I think I'm kind of responding to something that I think Megan raised around, is 8 points too few? Just offering another alternative, thinking about maybe there's another section where this also lives, and I think complements the limitations of just having this criteria being screened in only one section.
Faith, is your hand up again or still up? No, okay.
If I could add another point, go ahead.
No, please.
I mean, I think if I could add another point, I think as to maybe why this might be a worthy just consideration or something for staff to digest on is a lot of groups could add a component around how this addresses social justice. But I think where true, top performers or folks who've really done the work, I think where they would be able to shine is their analysis. And so I think the idea of even good intentions can lead and replicate harm and bad outcomes. But I think just asking the question around analysis and lived experience, working with communities or personal experience, and articulating that system change, I think adds another layer to, again, the limitations of just being a forward-facing question.
And I mean, not to, but to be, I want to make how, because I know that some of that, like I think about theory of change when you're saying that, but that's a very that's a jargony term. And so, is there a simple way? Is there like what's the because I think that we can probably look back at this and break apart a couple of these questions and see whether we can, because I think in order to score something like that, we need to go back and just think about where we asked that question, make sure we're explicitly calling it in, but also think about, yeah, where can we more further detail, obviously, our scoring criteria to capture that and or adjust points. So it doesn't have to be now, but what I'd love is any suggestions around what that question could look like so that we could just think through that and come back and present that next week.
And maybe just for clarification, Ramses, so that I'm not, because I'm, to see if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's kind of, I mean, it could potentially be as simple as asking how this planning process will advance social justice or advance racial justice. Or does it need to be more specific about kind of transformative systems change? We can't hear you.
Oh, I see Maria's hand up. I wonder if she has a good suggestion. I'm still digesting maybe the language. I think that's a good starting point, a suggestion for sure.
Okay, Maria?
I like how you asked the question, Katie. I think there's the ways we can break it down is to straightforward, like ask people, how are you shifting power, or who are you giving power to in the process that didn't have power before? What are the relationships? What are your relationships like with these groups, or what relationships do you want to form or are essential to moving equity forward? I think that's how we can kind of unpack theory of change and talk about short-term outcomes for who, long-term outcomes for who benefits from what you're going to do, because I think it's kind of easy to write some kind of narrative that's pretty generic around this, but if we ask people to reflect on who has power in this project, who will they give power to, ultimately I think that's important for me for elevating equity in the work, relationships and power and real participation.
Thank you. Those are great thoughts. It's possible also that if some of the, I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about, and not that this couldn't be, handled in some way, but one of the things that I'm thinking about are the folks who are coming in and they want a planning grant because they just need to pay for energy audits on some buildings. And so their planning grant will probably list, the auditor, if it's a commercial building, maybe like the engineer who's going to put together their scope and, kind of package that up and how we, but I think that there may be a way to create opportunities to speak to some of those more important social justice issues and also leave space for folks who have some pretty straightforward planning needs, or more simple planning needs, I guess.
And I mean, the focus, the focus here in this grant, and I think it extends certainly to the expectation is planning grants will seed oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes seed your small grants and your large grants. And so I think these are certainly important questions, as recognizing that smaller organizations will see this as and larger organizations will see this also as a way to sort of develop their proposals. And so I think what you'll see here is there is that focus on the priority populations, and I think we can, as we look through and the questions around engagement, outreach, I don't know if we call it. We can get more at what that relationship looks like and the quality of that work and that nuance of it. Since really the focus here is less on there isn't that much depth here on the project because we're acknowledging that folks are going to be planning that work. So I think that there's ways in which you can see where we ask that question. I just don't want to be, at times I think the balance that we want to have is not being so retrospective, because some organizations will just be new in this space. And so
I think we want to support those projects who are doing that straightforward stuff. Like you're right, like maybe someone just needs to do an assessment or audit. But I think if we are calling this a planning grant, and I think in planning, we make room for a knowledge exchange. We try to bring up people in learning and being involved. So even those, very minimal projects who are seeking some kind of seed money can still demonstrate ways that they can bring in people in that space who have never been brought in before. And, maybe even challenge them to do a little bit more of that if possible. There's always someone who could be trained, someone who could learn from it, or be brought along into the process. Or if that's expecting too much, then I could abandon that idea. But for me, I take it really seriously. If we're going to call it a planning grant, I think I want to incorporate like holistically and comprehensively what planning could be, especially for equity and clean energy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maria. Nancy?
Yeah, there's something that Maria just said that I thought seems that something just needs to be uplifted. I think that's, I think any opportunities we have to allow folks, communities that haven't, even something for like energy audit or an energy efficiency project or just doing an HVAC system, I think that sounds very cut and dry, but anything that allows opportunities for communities that have historically not had that access to funding or resources to plan or be able to partake in those projects, to transform their relationships to that is very, very important. And I think in some ways it's reflected on that future forward-facing question already. So it in some ways captures that, but I think it's the difference of again, like the uniqueness of asking the organization background. It's, again, we can talk about, anyone can talk about what a project can do. Well, I can't say anyone, but folks can talk about how it impacts frontline communities. But I think an organization with a background that says, here's our analysis about why that change is unique and different, that might not be a strong difference between the outcomes, but I think there is a different relational aspect in how communities are involved in that aspect. I don't know if I'm articulating really well on that, but again, I think it answers the question. It gives further weight to different community groups and how they show up in this space and the work that they do that's currently not reflected in the scoring. And I think that's sometimes can be the difference, all the difference in the world for how we want PCEF to be accessible for frontline communities.
Yeah, I think I hear it. I think, I think our starting place is always wanting to make the planning grants easier, certainly substantially easier than large grants, but I think what I'm hearing is the framing going into the planning grants is your planning. And the large grants, when we're in our efforts to simplify, there's acknowledgement in large grants that you're stating what you are doing. And so there's a different sort of level of burden in terms of coming to an application to make certain statements around your partnerships or whatever else. However, in a planning grant, it's really forcing folks to think more thoughtfully around in their planning effort itself, how are they thinking through that deeper engagement with community in sharing power and in ensuring that, you know, we are sort of, we're not just speaking to sort of the outcomes, but the process itself is reflective of a power building or organizing, or, you know, I think we can have many terms for how we talk about building or implementing social justice. So I think that's the focus is forcing people in a planning effort to be thinking about how they want to do that in their planning effort. At least that's how it took me a second to get there, and that's at least how I'm interpreting the, because I think I initially struggled with asking more in a planning grant than we may have in a large grant. And I think the difference in the large grant is there is an expectation around proof of, you know, you're going into a grant, you're expected to show exactly what are your partnerships, what are your relationships, that you can speak to your intention in a planning grant. Yeah.
Megan?
Yeah, I appreciate Ramtis's and Maria's comments around that. And it actually kind of inspired me to go back to the organizational information and how we're, the very first criteria we have is organization purpose supports PCEF goals of providing benefit. And I guess maybe that's still true, but I also, well, I guess what I'm wondering is if we're giving opportunity for groups who are newer or haven't been in the space to plan to be doing something different. So I just wonder, I guess, about comparing I don't know, it's something I'm thinking about and giving space. And I also wonder, kind of to Maria's and Randy's point, if perhaps the criteria somewhere, I'm not sure where, but probably in the project description, if there's something about, I mean, I heard you talk about like change, theory of change, or, you know, systems thinking, but also about kind of the partnerships that they're going to be thinking about and community engagement they're going to be thinking about.
I want to track, where was that second point, Megan?
Well, I think it would go under project description and scope, and I guess it's kind of in scope of planning and process is clear, manageable, and likely to succeed, but those words don't really get at what maybe the full points words get at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those words just sound like kind of efficient and, well, very clear, but what the full points are, and especially the language we've been talking about in the last 10 minutes, are more about like what sorts of partnerships, what sorts of community engagement, what sorts of analysis are you bringing to this? So I don't know, I do think it's important that the scope of planning process is clear, manageable, and likely to succeed, but that seems to be a different point than what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Maria? Nope, Maria's hand went away.
Sorry, I'm just trying to unmute and I clicked the wrong button. Oh. I'm a little disoriented, but you know, I've been reflecting a lot about our grants and thinking about the grants of different sizes, but ultimately, like one question I ask myself is, how much of this is just transactional? Like we have these big grants that we're asking a lot of, but then we have planning grants and small grants, and thinking, are those transactional? Are we just like, okay, we're gonna see a bunch of applications, we're gonna issue money, and it's kind of like not something that's about long-term building? And how much of the awards we issue are about investing in long-term building with organizations and communities, or just like seed money, and then, you know, not thinking about next steps, and how do we set people up for a long-term relationship to this work? So I think that's where I'm sitting. And Megan, I appreciate you talking about, you know, just thinking through this in terms of not creating any other barriers or making assumptions or expectations about our applicants. Because maybe like people doing climate equity work just want that transaction, like, you know, set us up with some money and, you know, don't ask too many questions about it. But I like to think that people want long-term relationships with this work, and those who are doing climate equity stuff, that they can benefit even more because they've been preparing for this, you know, and their work checks out, and they don't have to second guess it or fudge the language just to get a planning grant or a small grant. So that's just my like 2 cents on it, but I just feel like this is something I care a lot about, and I don't have a lot of answers right now to my own questions.
Yeah, I'm Maria, there's a point there, and I just missed the nugget because I wanted to, I guess, what is it that I think first I would just acknowledge the expectation very much so. And I mean, I think we had a bit of a debate around some of these criteria, and we did want it to match the large grant and small grant criteria around sort of reflecting community, because I think the expectation very much so is that this isn't just a seed for folks to do some planning, and it is a seed so they do planning, but in alignment with small grant, in alignment so that they're coming in next for a small grant or a large grant. So very much is expectation that the expectation is they are coming in a relationship with the program as part of this effort. But I don't know if there's something specific that calls that out more. I think our sort of lens was in looking through, and looking through the rest of the grants, what are the core elements? And so I hope you see those core elements very much in terms of the focus on priority population, focus on representation. Yeah. But I get that there may be more.
Yeah, no, you covered it. I just feel like there's so much to talk about. Might not even fit in this conversation specifically.
Yeah, one thing I just want to call up to is this organization purpose question, Megan, that you flagged. Right now it does say organization purpose supports PCEF goals, but it's of providing benefit to people of color, low-income people of color, women, people with disabilities, and those who are chronically underemployed. So it's less about, in a sense, the climate goals there in terms of the focus of the organization, that it is that it's first, does an organization know how to connect to the communities we want to prioritize? And it's really, if they can do that and they know they have those relationships, know how to connect, then it's second. It's really, our primary focus is making sure that those connections were primary, that those were where we were putting the weight. And so what I may ask is, I think we're going to have to review the transcript of this meeting to kind of really make sure we understand what's being said, just because it's obviously late, and review the notes to make sure we're capturing some of the comments and able to screen this as a staff and just go back through this and see, did we think that was captured somewhere? Do we think that we're able to clarify some of these comments in guidance? But we ask that you all also sit back and look through these in your own time, where you get to screen back and forth through the sections, and see whether whether the answers to a planning grant and subsequently the scoring as we've set it up would set up what you see as a strong proposal, so strong future projects. And what more else you?
Yeah. So and maybe on your own time between now and Sunday night, but also, and also I think a couple of things that I am hearing is definitely something around kind of partnerships, and like a lot of the conversation that we had around with this sort of around partnership and coalition building and collaboration that we also had in the past when we were talking about large and small grants and kind of criterion questions associated with those, and kind of are they kind of even more particularly relevant in planning. And then so that's one thing that I think that we will be thinking about and trying to figure out how to maybe incorporate. And then I just also wanted to, I guess, note that one thing that we definitely have heard from nonprofits and from small organizations is that there's often not planning money, right? Like there are a lot of funders who like to fund stuff that that organizations that have the general funds available to do the planning on their own dime, so are able to access access that money. So one really important purpose of the planning grants is just to be able to resource those organizations that have not been resourced to have the time and maybe buy the equipment or hire the technical experts to be able to actually do the planning. So wanting to also, I guess, just keep that in mind. I think that there are, and I know you all know this as well, there are lots of organizations that exist, small organizations that are highly able to, do great planning and just haven't been resourced to do it. And so one of the things that we want to do is just create criteria that identifies them and gets them grants to be able to spend the time to do that work. So we're going to be coming back. We're going to be collecting your feedback in between now and Sunday evening, and also kind of just listening to the transcript and looking at the notes and making some adjustments to the small grants and to the planning grants, with the hope that we would be able to have you all kind of allow us to advance those to finalization at our meeting, which is next Wednesday. So just as a reminder. Sam, did you have any other things that you wanted to say about next steps before, or the planning grants before we move on to closing comments?
I think, it's, well, maybe I'll just, I think there's other things. I won't say much more about planning grants. What I'll say is that, we certainly hope to give you all back some time here in your bit. And so, not that should be motivation to not being diligent in providing us your comments and feedback, but we will certainly be, we've sent doodle polls out, and we've started setting up our internal calendar invites, but we'll certainly be hoping to give you back some days. In the next month or so, during our downtime, once we start sort of cranking on the RFP, there's a few other things that we need to bring to you all. I've mentioned this, but I just want to keep this so it doesn't get lost on us. We should be able to, I think, in our next meeting, if not the next one after that, bring you all a recommendation around nomination. I think it should be able to be the next one. We should be able to, we're going to move the bylaws work, and that we'd like to at least get the bylaws moved and so we can have a formal structure so that we're not left without bylaws going into the RFP. And then there's probably a couple more discussions just around community engagement guidelines that we've been internally working on that we'll share with the committee, just so that you all sort of have something to lean on as once the RFP opens. We want to just make sure you feel comfortable and have clear guidance from us. So that's a little bit that we'll be sharing too in the coming weeks. And I'm sure I'm missing other things, and we'll probably also talk about a few other things around allocation as well. So, which will help round out a lot of these, which help fill in the gaps and round out some of the conversation elements that you might not necessarily have seen captured here or elsewhere. So that's a lot to say at the end of the day. I don't know if it means anything at this point. Thank you. That's all I have to share. Stop talking.
Are there any other comments or questions from committee members, suggestions? We do have a few minutes. It's about 13 minutes before 9 o'clock, but I just wanted to kind of open up the floor. Okay, well then we're going to call it a night.